this is Christina Wallis here. Thank you for popping back to my channel, and this is my take on the lovely Vanda Orchid. I hope you like it, and let's get started. So I didn't have any cutters for this Vanda, so I ended up doing templates. I'm going to put this on my Pinterest board in case someone finds it useful, and one of those days I'm sure I'll figure out how to do vector and convert them into a nice vector shapes, easier to print out and use. But anyhow, you could just trace it from computer if you find those cutters on sale somewhere. And here I'm going to cut out my cold porcelain quite thick, so I'm leaving it in real time in case some of you find it useful that way. Generally, I find it very easy to cut around cold porcelain because it doesn't drag itself along with the wheel the way gum paste and pastelage do. So it's a little bit like perhaps chocolate. Yes, the way it cuts, but it's a lot easier to pick up than chocolate. Because orchids have quite chunky petals, you could just thin the edges like this without a sleeve, and this doesn't misshape the shape of each petal. But if you look at Vanda petals, they do come in different shapes and not necessarily very neat and straight shapes. So if you want it a little bit juggly and textured, you could just do it like this. And that works also very nice. Even if you are a regular viewer on my channel, for which, by the way, I thank you very much indeed, I don't think I've shown this particular element of technique, wiring technique, in my videos before, so do pay attention. This is basically how to wire a petal that's to be straight as opposed to go at an angle without any kind of a little board or anything. So I hope you find it useful. So the petal here needs to have some kind of a body in it for this to work, and also make sure that you pinch in the sides of this petal to the middle. I'll show you in a minute. Pinch it into the middle so there's actually a clay, a cold porcelain, to go over the wire, as opposed to just squishing it with the veiner later without anything to go over the top of the wire. I hope that makes sense. This is it. It's going to go into the veiner now. The veiner is very nice, cheap veiner from China, and it's really good for a silicone veiner. For something like this, there is other type of veiners which I suspect have harder and deeper grooves, but I would probably come back to that in another video to where you could get veiners which would work with this kind of plants and could only be used with cold porcelain for a particularly good effect. But for now, I just want to say that for obvious reason of the texture and the eventual pattern, you really need to pay attention to the fact that the cold porcelain you use needs to be as fresh as possible. So do one petal at a time, keep your petals in bags, because you really want to have the entire surface textured. And so make sure you apply even pressure, and here you flip it to the other side, and this is what you get. If big chunks of your petal are missing texture, you might as well forget it and do it again. You will see what I mean when I show you how to tone it, how to color these little petals. And here you go. Try to always give your petals some kind of a shape, preferably the same shape as you see, or some shape of your own design, but don't just leave them straight. It won't look as nice, and it's so easily shaped, isn't it? And these are just little tips what to do if you pull up your petal and it's not quite fully textured. Make sure whenever possible that your texture is at maximum, possible maximum. And this is it. Now you have your petals. I'm going to show you how to make the middle. I have fiddled with this middle for a little while, back and forth, and I was trying to find some kind of a uniform shape that would help me and you to repeat the same shape from orchid to orchid, like the cutters do. Unfortunately though, so far I've had no luck, and so I've decided to just shape it how I see it. Again, I've copied some pictures on my Pinterest. So I've decided, some pictures of the real flower, so I've decided to shape it, to just copycat the real shape, and then hopefully I'll get into some kind of a routine for making it. So I'm sorry if it's difficult to follow, but I do hope it will help, as I don't think there are any tutorials on this or anything essential. I don't know if you can see here, as camera goes a bit fuzzy here and there, but this cutout is quite thick, which kind of helps the whole shaping thing. Yeah, it does get better in a minute. So for something like this, especially for orchid, it really does help not to over thin your little small parts, because it's just not worth it. And yeah, the thick shape does allow for beautiful curvature of these little details. You'll see it in a minute. And so because I'm working on the center in parts, individual parts, I'm keeping whatever's done in the bag so it doesn't go too hard, and that is a very good practice to get in the habit of. And yeah, let's see what happens here, because if you look at the pictures, if you look at this Vanda head on, then you don't really at all see the middle because of the way how it sits parallel to the head and doesn't bend the little tongue underneath the round. But if you manage to get some rare pictures of this orchid when you see it sideways, you see that this tongue of the center is actually quite long. You might find that by the time you got as far as this, it would be quite difficult to vein anything, but if you can, it might be a good idea because it just makes flower look a little bit more interesting. Even if the veiner doesn't necessarily work per se, the texture itself might be quite nice. Now here, I don't advise people to use scissors whenever you want to change shapes, etc, etc. It's always better to have your initial kind of part quite nice and shaped, but as a last resort, scissors would do. So initially I was just going to wire the little circle at the end, but then I was fiddling with it and I realized that the tongue at the bottom may or may not sit at the right angle, because as I mentioned, if you look at the flower head on, the stang is actually quite hard to see, certainly hard to see how long it is, so it does have to sit at the right angle. So I've decided to add another wire. It's probably possible to put the whole thing on the same wire, but right now I'm just doing this YouTube. I don't have time to figure it out, but if you can, by all means do use one wire, because it would probably help the assembly, and in general, why use two if you could just use one, right? And as to this little kind of split bit at the end, I would probably leave it to the very end when you're doing an assembly, because of the way it kind of points in the same direction as the flower does. I don't know, it's hard to explain it, but I just wanted to see how it would work all in the same kind of a teeny center, and it does seem to work. But when you do it, leave it to the very end, because it's actually a very easy part, and when you're finished with it, just smoothen it out. Now, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but this video is way too long for just one video, for you guys not to get really bored and my ratings to be kind of affected by people dropping out. And plus, I just think it's a very complicated flower to kind of take in all at the same time. So I'm going to put the video out on how to tone it, how to color it, and how to assemble it nicely next week. Thank you for watching, and I see you again next Friday.